Hello and welcome to Speaking Spirit, where we talk about all things spiritual. Your host, John Moore, is a shamanic practitioner and spiritual teacher. And now, here's John.
Hello, everybody. It's been a little while. It's been almost a month since I put one of these out. As I record this, it is the morning of New Year's Eve, 2021. Whenever you happen to listen to this is when I'm recording it. And we've just gotten through a very busy holiday season for me. I celebrate both Yule and Christmas. I don't identify as a Christian, but Christmas has become a holiday open to everyone, and I like that. I like aspects of it. I love some of the messages of Christmas, not the rampant consumerism, but I do love gift giving, and I like eating. I love eating a lot. Maybe I'll do a whole episode on the spiritual nature of food and feasting and making food offerings and that sort of thing sometime in the future. So, anyway, I also celebrate Yule, and Hanukkah was earlier than that, and Diwali was earlier than that. I don't celebrate all of those, but I recognize that we have been through a busy holiday season. And in most areas of the world, COVID is surging. We've got this Omicron variant, and it's a very serious thing. And a lot of people are winding up in the hospital, and our hospitals are getting overwhelmed. And now they're canceling. A lot of them are canceling non-emergency services non-emergency services like surgeries and things like that, because they're just completely overwhelmed. And healthcare workers are, healthcare workers are overwhelmed and tired. And honestly, I feel for them. What they've had to put up with for years now. Gosh. So I'm hoping to, in the new year, bring a little bit of a message of hope, but something that's I hope it's a little bit unusual for this podcast is I've got a little bit of a bone to pick. I've got a little bit of a complaint, and I don't love complaining. Complaining is not the most fun thing I do, and I don't love it. But I have a little bit of a complaint, but the caveat is that I will also potentially offer a solution. So, in my 20 years of working in the technology field, I would, always try to, if a problem came up and I had to go to a manager or something, whenever possible, I would always try to come with a proposed solution and sort of say, okay, XYZ is a problem, and this is how I think we could fix it. Or I would come with a problem and ask for help. Like, XYZ is a problem. I don't know how to fix it. Do you know who I can go to for some more help? Because then I'm not just a complainer. I become part of the solution. And so I'm going to challenge everybody listening to this podcast, and I hope that you will challenge people who don't listen to this podcast to be part of the solution to whatever is going on in the world. And that includes COVID. That includes paying attention. I know people have strong feelings for or against, but I would encourage people to get vaccinated, fully vaccinated and boosted. I am fully vaccinated and boosted. Even though I do firmly believe in spiritual healing, and I believe in taking care of your body and all of those things, I do think that the vaccines are safe. I believe they're fully tested and approved. I think every anti-vax argument I have seen has not borne truth. And I realize people are really strongly attached to their opinion, and I may be talking to people who are not going to shift their opinion at all about this. But if you look with a critical eye, and I'm, while I'm a spiritual person, I'm also very scientifically minded. And anecdotal evidence is not good evidence. It's not evidence of anything. My grandmother smoked her whole life and lived to be 90. Does not mean that smoking is good for you, or that it doesn't kill at least a third of the people who do it, because it does. And that's the reality of it. And there is survivorship bias. Early on in the pandemic, I had a very mild case of what I think was COVID, because I lost my sense of taste and smell. And, it wasn't bad. It was like a cold for several weeks, and I isolated, and I couldn't get tested at that time because I didn't have any comorbidities, and they weren't testing people who weren't older. There were no at-home tests back then. The tests that they had were the ones where they had to ram the Q-tip all the way back and practically touch your brain with it. So I wasn't looking forward to getting that. So unless I was incredibly sick. So I didn't get tested, but I think I had it very early on, and it was extremely mild. And I know people who have contracted COVID since and have had extremely mild symptoms, although I do know people whose sense of taste and smell have not recovered months later. And for me, that would be a bad thing to lose. I have a very keen sense of smell, and as I spoke to earlier, I love taste. So anyway, there is this survivorship bias where I go, I went through that. I'm fine. It's no big deal. It's that whole thing where we didn't wear seatbelts when I was a kid and I turned out fine. Yeah, but that ignores the, 800,000 people in the U.S., closing on 1 million people in the U.S. who have died of COVID, closing on 1 million people. So any inkling that you have that this thing is not serious, and the other aspect is, am I worried that if I got COVID that I would get, extremely sick, wind up in the hospital, or die? Probably not. I'm a fairly healthy person. I'm getting up there in age, but I'm not, I'm not over 60. And, so the risk factors for me are very low. But there is a lot of thinking these days that are like, well, I don't have anything to worry about, so why do I got to do this? The main reason I got fully vaccinated and got boosted, besides the fact that I don't want to have to quarantine if I, by getting sick, or, God forbid I do get seriously ill and take up a hospital bed somewhere. But I believe it's my civic duty. I believe that I'm a stopgap, and that being vaccinated and boosted makes it much less likely that I contract and pass the disease on to others. And I'm still taking precautions. I do still wear a mask, and I realize people have strong feelings about that too. But when I go out in public and I'm in an enclosed space with people, I still wear a mask. I still socially distance from people, because those things I believe are still relevant and important. And, anyway, that's all I want to talk about that. That's my PSA for that. So anyway, I would encourage you to, if you're, I can't imagine there are too many people on the fence these days. If you are at all on the fence, just get better information, get good information, not people jawing on social media or silly blogs or crazy YouTube channels or politicians. Don't listen to any of those people, please. Listen to the people who work in epidemiology. There's this other thing that's going around that is surprising and shocking to me, that I think that, people think their quote unquote common sense, whatever that means, outdoes expertise of people who have spent decades studying in a specific field. And I got news for you. It doesn't. It does not. It never does. I realize there's this thing where people are bumping up against these experts who are changing their recommendations pretty frequently, and that's frustrating. But that's what science does, and that doesn't make science wrong. Science is the scientific method. Science is a method. It's not a, we speak of science as if it's a thing, but it's a method of trying to figure out what is more effective, what is more truthful statement. And, science is supposed to be self-correcting, right? Meaning when we get new information, we change our mind about something. As better information gets in, and I realize it's really difficult. It's difficult for me as a layperson to keep up with the shifting recommendations. And very recently, my kids and I were exposed to somebody who turned out to be diagnosed with COVID later. He was not symptomatic at the time that we were exposed to him, and I didn't know what to do. And I read the CDC guidelines, and they were confusing. And what I did was I wound up calling my kid's doctor's office, and they had recommendations based on my kid's vaccination status and the time of exposure and all of those things. And so, if you have questions, rely on the people who know more about things than you do. That's another thing that I like is relying on experts. Anyway, I've been talking a very long time about COVID, and that is not the main topic of this. I really want this pandemic to be over, and the only way we're going to get there is if people start taking responsibility, not just for themselves, but for their neighbors. It's not me first, it's we first. That's my PSA for today. So the thing I want to talk about, and I realize I'm starting with all kinds of negativity, but I'm going to give some suggestions because, again, I don't like to present a problem without some kind of solution, particularly on this podcast where I have time to think about a little bit what I'm going to talk about. These are very impromptu. I don't script them. I don't edit them. So you're getting the pure, unfiltered me when I take a sip of coffee, as I will do right now. You'll hear that. Or if I cough or sneeze, or God forbid, pass gas, you might hear that. I try not to be that rude or whatever, but I want you to have sort of unfiltered me, not because that is more valuable than filtered me or whatever, but I feel like this is a way that I connect with people and that I'm not being fake, I'm not pretending, I'm not putting on my best face. Now, in other public appearances, I might do that. I do radio spots once a week here in Maine, and they edit them. They put them through filters, and I've only heard myself one time, and on the radio I was like, wow, that's me. I sound pretty good. It's because they do a whole lot of editing and cut out my ums and ers and cut out things I say that might not make sense and that kind of thing. Well, I don't do that here. And I realize, different people are going to have different tastes. Different people are going to like my voice or hate my voice, and that's totally fine. And you may like what I have to say or hate what I have to say, and that's totally fine too. Everybody is entitled to their opinion, which is going to start me off on something. And yeah, people are entitled to their opinions, but there's something. The thing that kind of set me off, and this is a thing I have a complaint about, was very recently on social media, and social media is a bit of a jungle, right? Sometimes you can get good things from social media. You can find out about wonderful podcasts or what have you, and sometimes it is a garbage pit or a cesspit of infighting and insults and political junk and all kinds of stuff. But you take the good with the bad, I guess. So very recently on social media, a person, and I won't name this person or really indicate who they are because it's not my intention to attack anybody personally. What I'm going to do is I'm going to challenge an idea. And yes, he's entitled to his opinion, and as am I. I'm entitled to my opinion about his opinion. and I'm entitled to my opinion about how he expresses his opinion as well. So there's something that is sort of rife in the spiritual community, and it doesn't matter what part of the spiritual community it is, but it's this form of spiritual egotism. And it is the farthest thing from being spiritual I can imagine. It is, in my opinion, destructive. It puts people in boxes. It separates us more than unites us. It makes us feel disconnected. It makes us feel less than. So the opinion that was shared on social media recently was somebody shared an article where an Eastern traditional shaman was speaking about the challenges they went through, and they didn't want to be a shaman, and XYZ. And that is a very common story in shamanic cultures. Shamanic crisis is a real thing. Many people go through, in indigenous cultures, they have to go through a very serious, maybe life-threatening crisis, and spirit chooses them. And that happens in the West too, but we don't tend to live in shamanic cultures unless you live in an indigenous culture in the West. So this person, who is a teacher of shamanism, said, hey, look at this. All these Westerners, and this person is a Westerner who teaches shamanism, they're all crazy. Already starting with a pejorative, calling people crazy. I don't like that. I'm sorry. I don't like the way you're expressing your opinion. Putting people down. And putting people below you. I'm better than you because you're crazy. You're crazy because you don't know everybody's running to become a shaman and nobody knows what it means to be a shaman and blah, 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 blah. You can tell how I feel about this person's opinion. Again, he's entitled to it, but I don't like it, and I don't like the way he expressed it. I don't like it. It is not a very, I'm trying not to be judgmental, but I'm going to come across as very judgmental. So it's just going to happen. I'm just going to accept it. I'm going to accept that my judgment is coming up. And that is egoic on my part. I get it. But, I don't like this putting other people down, this separating people out. You can't be a shaman because you don't meet these 5 random criteria that I have decided are the most important. And if you interviewed people... If you went to 100 different shamanic cultures, traditional indigenous shamanic cultures, and said, what is required to become a shaman in your culture, you would get 100 different, completely different answers. There would be some similarities. There would be completely different answers. So, yeah, could I go out and cherry pick one person's opinion and decide I can use that to put down and insult other people from my own culture who are trying to do the same things that I'm doing? I could do that. I don't think that's a very positive way of acting. I don't think that's helpful. I don't think it's beneficial. I don't think it is doing anything other than, I am superior to you because you want to be a shaman and I know what it takes and you don't. Again, it's about separation. And in my shamanic practice, I learned that we are all connected. So when I see this opinion come out, it hurts because I feel deeply connected to people who are in the shamanic community. And we'll put it this way. When I have misspoken, I put out something recently on my blog about shamanism, and I misstated something. I stated something that gave the wrong impression. It was not intentional, and it wasn't technically a lie. It was just I said something in a way that I shouldn't have said it, and my teacher read it and contacted me immediately and said, love your blog. I noticed that you said this, and that's not exactly true. And, you might want to change that. And I did, because she was right. And I had not intended it to come across the way that it did, but I'm a human being and I made a mistake and I fixed it. So I want people to fix stuff. And there's a thing that's going on in the spiritual community, this spiritual egotism. That's one aspect of it, where you're crazy because you want to be a shaman. How about we educate people? And by educating people, if you start off by calling them crazy, I have decades of experience educating adults. I don't have experience educating children, but I've taught adults for decades, martial arts and shamanism and technology, and I wrote a technology textbook. And when you start off by insulting your audience to make yourself seem better, you lose your audience. They shut down. You cannot educate them. So when you say, all you Westerners who want to be shamans are crazy, you're not trying to educate people. You're trying to insult people, or you're trying to get people on, who hold you in some esteem to go, I didn't realize that. All these other people, they're crazy, but I'm following you, so I'm an insider, and those are crazy people. I'm sane because I follow you. I don't like that. And the other thing, so there's kind of two complaints here, and then I promise I'm going to get to my proposed solution, something I would like to see. The other thing that that I see happening a whole lot are gatekeepers. Gatekeepers of culture. And, I've run into this, and I was teaching a workshop in shamanism a couple years back, maybe 3 years ago. Time's sort of weird now that we've been in COVID for so long. So it was probably 3 years ago. I was teaching an introductory workshop in shamanism, and there was a flyer and some posts online about it. And in there was a picture of a hoop drum that I use for shamanic journeying. And a gentleman, and I now know this guy, and I respect his intention, but I think he went about this the wrong way, contacted me out of the blue and said, "Are you some kind of scam artist?" And I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about." He, going back and forth, he thought I was pretending to teach Native American spirituality, and I do not, and I make it very clear that that is not something I have expertise in, it's not something I teach, and it's not something that I represent that I teach. So because this person has certain biases, he feels like shamanism is a Native American practice. I will say that many Native American tribes have people who are shamanic, so there are many shamanic cultures, but shamanic cultures exist all over the world. And he said, "You have no right to use that drum. It's not yours. It's not from your culture." BS. But it's just ignorance. It's just that he didn't know, because he has only seen hoop drums in context of Native Americans using them. And despite the fact that I actually made my hoop drum in a drum birthing ceremony with a Native American teacher, I do come from cultures where the hoop drum is common, and that is almost every culture. Many, 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 many cultures use hoop drums. They are prehistoric instruments. There are probably no existing cultures that invented the hoop drum, right? So, this has been passed along human culture to human culture. And, my ancestors my Celtic ancestors used hoop drums. Still do, as a matter of fact. You see a baron, which is a traditional Irish instrument, that is a hoop drum. My Scandinavian ancestors used hoop drums. Scandinavian shamans, Sami shamans, and Scandinavian shamans still do use hoop drums. Hoop drums are everywhere. We see them in many different continents. We see them amongst many different cultures. They are, again, prehistoric things. It's like saying, because I've only watched Western movies, that I believe that Native American culture was the only culture to use a bow and arrow. And that is far from true, right? We know that bow and arrow was in common use in cultures everywhere. Welsh longbowmen were feared in the Middle Ages, and bows and arrows commonly used in Asia. And so again, it's an ancient tool that's adapted for different cultures. But so my issue with kind of both of these things is that and I'm going to talk about cultural appropriation and when it's actually a problem. And there's a great article I read recently about cultural appropriation, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So my main problem with both of these things is that they're saying, because of the circumstances of your birth or history or upbringing or whatever, you are not eligible to have spiritual healing or spiritual wholeness or to follow the spiritual path that you are interested in. And we're living in a world that is so difficult and so challenging. Kind of, my feeling is I'm a little indignant. How dare you? How dare you tell people they can't seek out spiritual wholeness? Now, people might be doing it in a way that is not helpful or harmful or whatever. But if you just call people crazy and offer no solution, or if you just say you can't do that because you're a fraud and you're stealing, you're not offering a solution. You're not offering any kind of solution. That's not helpful to anyone. And cultural appropriation has become a really sticky term. And somebody told me, oh, you can't use the word shaman because that's not your word. What do you mean that's not my word? Shaman is an English word. Yes, it came into English from another language in the 17th century. But how many of our words come from French, in English, come from French or Spanish or Latin or Greek? Most of the, a good portion of the English language is does not directly descend from Old English. And the word shaman shows up, it's a it comes from a Proto-Indo-European root word. And it shows up in Sanskrit, in Chinese, in Pali. It shows up in Akkadian. It shows up in certain form in Hebrew. So let's get off the kick that the Tungusic people, and I'm not taking anything away from them, of Siberia, that they invented the word shaman out of whole cloth, that it didn't exist before they started using the word. It's not true. And when people challenge me, I try to educate them. I don't try to get into an argument with them, even though it sounds like I'm being argumentative now. I challenge them and present them with hopefully better information, Will that change some people's minds? No. It's very clear that there are a large group of people in the world who are not affected by facts, are not affected by new or better information. Once I have dug in, my opinion is my opinion. You people are crazy. You can't do this because you're crazy, and I have deemed that you're crazy, and indigenous people think you're crazy. Really, you speak on behalf of all indigenous people. The other phenomena I see quite a bit is these gatekeepers who are like, you can't do X because it is a closed practice. This one is a little challenging too, and I'll give you an example. Somebody very recently said, you shouldn't smudge or use the word smudge because that is a Native American practice and it's a closed practice. Let me tell you how many problems I have with that statement. And again, it's, when I hear stuff like that, I respond to it hopefully from a factual perspective and say, well, that's not exactly true. First of all, the word smudge is not a Native American word. So to say that the word comes from Native American culture, as if Native American culture is a single culture, and as if there is a single language, none of those things are true. And even if the word smudge came from, the Wabanaki or something, it would not belong to every Native American culture. But let's look at the act of smudging, the act of using, burning herbs to purify or for spiritual purposes or for healing. I cannot think of a culture that doesn't do that. The Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians did that. There are recipes. I've made kaifi, which is incense made from resins and herbs. I've made that, and that was on the written out on the walls of King Tut's tomb. So and in Scottish culture, there's a practice, I think it's called seining, and they use rosemary to smudge. They burn it and use it for spiritual purification and healing. So the problem number one is to say X practice belongs to X culture, is very frequently untrue. There are exceptions to that. I've read things where saying, white people shouldn't practice voodoo because that comes from Haiti and it's only, people who are of Haitian descent or, whatever. But there are practitioners out there from Haiti who will teach Caucasian people from other cultures, and don't have a problem with sharing their religion, their spirituality with other people. So are they wrong? Who gets to be right here? So here's the other problem, and this is something that I read from somebody who was actually Native American who was talking about this. Like, somebody asked them, is it okay to smudge? And they said, why are you asking me? Because there is no one person. Like, you could ask, you could go to 10 Native American people, 10 different tribes maybe, or even 10 people within the same tribe, and say, is it okay to smudge? And you might get 10 different answers, or you might get 2 or 3 different answers. Because nobody owns culture. Nobody owns, cultural practice. And this was the thing that was expressed. She was like, well, whether I have a problem with it or not, it's not mine to give or take. Now, there's a couple. This is where cultural appropriation becomes an actual problem, right? Problem number one is when it becomes exploitive, right? And so, for example, I do not. I do smudge. I will use rosemary very frequently. I like the smell a whole lot. I don't use white sage. And the reason for that is not because only people born in a certain area to certain parents are allowed to use white sage. But I only use white sage I don't use white sage, sorry, because it is a traditional, in many Native American tribes, it is a traditional smudging herb, and it has been over-harvested by people selling it in spiritual shops. And because smudging has become so popular, people are encroaching on traditional Native harvesting grounds, and that's exploitive, right? That's exploitive. If I were to teach shamanism, and let's say I put an Apache war bonnet on, falsely presenting myself as teaching something from that culture, and essentially taking away from that culture, that is both exploitive and disrespectful. So I would not do that. And this is where appropriation is actually problematic. Where appropriation is not problematic is saying, I really respect that part of your culture. I want to learn more about it. I want to experience it from somebody who is willing to share it. For example, I have taken part in a pipe ceremony with somebody who is a pipe carrier, and pipe carriers are selected, and I don't know the whole deal, but I was honored to take part in a pipe ceremony. Would I now go out and lead a pipe ceremony? I would not, because I have not been, that has not been passed on to me as a type of teaching. But there are tribes and elders and things like that who will, pass these things on to non-Indigenous people, and who's to say that they're right or wrong or what have you. So exploitation and disrespect are a couple of problematic areas of appropriation. And so there was a great article that I read recently, and wish I could remember who wrote it. And but it was written by an African American woman who had some fantastic points, and she was saying, like, there's all these cries of cultural appropriation, and there's a lot of backlash against it because there are some really silly things, like saying that white people can't make burritos because only people from Mexico can make burritos, or stuff like that. Which, I don't know. I mean, that seems pretty silly to me. But she was talking about sort of financial exploitation specifically. And so one example she used, and I actually knew this, was Elvis Presley's famous song "Hound Dog" was actually sung first by an African American woman who is singing about, like, kind of a dirty dog, a man, and her rendition of song, in my personal opinion, far superior to Elvis Presley's rendition. And Elvis had to change up the words because obviously he's not singing about a philandering man. He made it actually about a dog, which always seemed really weird to me. Even as a child, when I heard that song, I was like, why is he singing about a hound dog not catching a rabbit? And it didn't make a lot of sense to me. So go out and look up the original and listen to that. So there's a history of exploitation of black musicians in the United States and probably in many other places. I can think of many instances, but this is one where Elvis, made millions and millions of dollars, and the original artist made a pittance, maybe died of poverty. I don't know, but I do know this. So that if you're familiar with the song, the jungle, in the jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. That actually comes from an African chant And the original recording is available. You can find it. It's scratchy. It's from like the 20s or the 30s. It's very old. The musician who the African musician who laid down that track sold the rights to it for something like the equivalent of $1.50 today. And he did wind up dying in poverty, and eventually his estate, but it took decades, was awarded. They basically said he was cheated out of millions of dollars in residuals for this song over so many years. But look it up. Go look at the original. So this is exploitation. So the other thing is disrespect. So when we make fun of cultures, or we use cultures as mascots, for example, that can be very hurtful. When we adopt native regalia, for example, as a costume, you're taking something that is sacred to people and turning it into, a Halloween costume or something along those lines. And it's really disrespectful in a way that can be harmful to people, can be hurtful. It puts people down. So this is where the problems of appropriation actually come from, things that are exploitive and disrespectful. If we were to go around and say, you cannot ever use a word that doesn't belong to the culture that you were born into, you cannot cook cuisine that does not come from a culture that you belong to. I don't care who you are or where you're living, unless you are actually indigenous and living in a traditional culture that hasn't changed for several thousands of years. You're probably going to have to eliminate a lot of stuff from your life. Culture borrows, culture appropriates. It always has, and it always will. Right? The English language is the reason it's so mixed up and a hodgepodge, and spelling is so weird, is because it borrows from so many other languages. And then look at how many other languages borrow from English, which in turn had borrowed from other places. So it must be fun to be a linguist and try to track down the etymology of different words. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I'm not a linguist, but I will research where words come from and the etymology of words. So somebody recently said, this was another one on social media. They said, oh, you can't use the word magician unless you are a Zoroastrian priest from Iran or something along those lines, because the word magi came from that word. Let's forget the fact that for over 1,000 years, the magic and magician have been part of the English language and have come in from different sources and are used in different ways in different cultures. And so jokingly, I said, well, you can't use the word person unless you are a Roman theatrical mask, because that's where the word person comes from. And you can't use the word human unless you are dirt from the earth, because it comes from humus, which is dirt from the earth. And persona was a word for a Roman theatrical mask. How silly would it be if we tried to say, you can't use this word unless you are using it in the context it came into the English language 1,500 years ago or 1,000 years ago? How much of you would not be able to listen to this? I wouldn't be able to do this podcast. I can't even think of, in an average sentence, probably 80% of the words aren't, English is originally a Germanic language. If you look back at Old English, there probably aren't a lot of Germanic words in there. Probably most of them are not. There's a lot of Romance language in there, a lot of French, a lot of Roman, because England, where English came from, was invaded so many times, right? There were Viking raids, and they set up settlements, and there were Roman raids, and they set up settlements, and then there were the indigenous people that lived there, and then there were the Angles and the Saxons and all, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going off on a long tangent to talk about these sort of gatekeeper problem, this gatekeeper issue. And that is, people who set themselves up as the authority to say, you can't do that because of the race I perceive you to be, or the national origin I perceive you to be, or the gender I see you to be. We were recently, somebody asked a question online about the Greek goddess Hecate, who is still worshipped, I guess, for lack of a better term, amongst lots of pagans. She is, amongst many things, the goddess of witchcraft and sorcery. So lots of people who identify as pagan, particularly Hellenistic pagans. She comes to us from Greece, but maybe cultures before that. And here's another thing, like, who knows where Hecate came from? And there aren't Greek people out there saying, listen, if you aren't 100% Greek, you can't have an altar to Hecate. So somebody said recently, a man asked a question online, and a woman said Hecate would never reveal her secrets to a man. Really? So you are the gatekeeper of Hecate. I almost have no words for that. There are, there are lots of people of all genders and sexes, genders, gender identities, sexualities, who do work with all sorts of gods. And I can tell you that some of the leading experts on the worship of Hecate today are men. Some are women, but there are some who are men. And they seem to be very effective at what they do. I don't think, honestly, when it comes to spirit, we're all the same underneath. There's no difference. When we're talking about spirit, when we're talking about the undying divine spark within all of us, there's no difference between a female spirit or a male spirit, or a Native American spirit or a spirit from somebody from Africa. We are all the same underneath. We are all connected. And so this is where I think the solution, or my proposals, come in. First of all, let's stop separating people into little boxes. Yes, let us respect culture. Let us not be exploitive of people who have been exploited for so long. Let us support indigenous cultures. Let us support tribal rights all over the world. Tribal rights to land and to resources. We want to raise everybody up. We don't want to keep people separated. We have been doing that for thousands of years, and how has it worked for us? Let me tell you, it sucks. We have wars. We have racism. We have sexism. We have violence. This is all a product of this separation. And when I see it from people who may have great intentions, you might have the best of intentions. Oh, I am going to speak up for this, for these people who have been persecuted. You might have the best intentions in the world, but the more you keep people separated, the more separated we are. I mean, it's just we just keep the status quo. We keep the patriarchy in place. When we encounter people who are spiritual seekers, whatever path they decide to tread upon, go down, explore, or follow as long as they live, as long as they're not harming anyone else, let them, support them, encourage them. Life is hard. Life is hard. And how dare we take things away from people that are helping them get through life? And I'm going to speak very honestly and be a little bit vulnerable here and say to you that if it were not for shamanism, if it were not for my study of shamanism, I probably would not still be alive today. I was on my way out when I took up the practice of shamanism to heal myself. I had lost 60 pounds. I could not eat. I could not sleep. My adrenals were completely burned out. They tested my adrenals and said you're one tiny level away from having permanent damage that cannot be repaired. Though people at the time might not have known it because I was fairly good at hiding it, other than you can't hide a loss of 60 pounds, I was very ill. Very ill. And people want to say, no, you should have just died because your parents were not born, you were not born inside an indigenous culture. I'm sorry. No, that's not going to fly. That doesn't fly. And the other thing is, we don't say things like, well, you are not a Middle Eastern or Greek person, so you can't be Christian. Or I can't think, but all of these, we don't tell, there are lots of Native American people who go to Christian churches. We don't tell them they can't do that. You can't do that. Why? Because that wouldn't be right. Now there are some racist churches out there. I realize that. I don't think we only have to look to some of these, I'll call them folkish churches these churches are for white people only, to see how problematic this separation can become when it is taken to its extreme. Right. So, instead of calling people crazy, here's where, I promise I'm getting to the solution part. I've talked a little bit about it. Instead of calling people crazy, putting them down, putting them in little boxes, let us work to bring people together, to uplift them. Before you open your mouth, think about the effect of or type in social media. Think about the effect that it's going to have for people. And think about getting some more information if you think you have the answer to something. If you're making really generalized statements about things, it's time to learn some stuff. If you're saying things like, Westerners are crazy, that's a really generic statement. If you're saying things like, you can't do this because it doesn't belong to you. It's kind of a generic statement. Do some research and find out. And yeah, I mean, if there's actual injustice out there, that deserves to have attention pointed to it. If there's exploitation, if there's disrespect, I've called people out. I saw recently there were some people doing a hodgepodge ceremony, as I would call it. And I don't have a problem with anybody's particular ceremony. People can create ceremony, create ritual. I certainly do. I have a ritual coming up that I've created, a public ritual. But they were doing a quote unquote shamanic initiation. They were doing it on a young boy. And they were in Europe somewhere, and they were two European gentlemen in blue jeans and Apache war bonnets, and they were surrounded by Celtic symbols. And, I was sort of like, well, we probably should be avoiding the Apache war bonnets if we are not actually Apache. And, that is, I understand that you may be wanting to, I don't know what the point of them wearing those war bonnets were. But it was inappropriate. It came across as, whether they intended respect or not, it was basically they were trying to present the image that they were doing something that had legitimacy because it was attached to some particular Native American tribe. And that's exploitive, and that is also not a good thing. And that's why I make it very, very clear to people who mistakenly think that I'm doing some kind of Native American ceremony because I use a hoop drum. And that's it. I don't dress in buckskin or wear Native American regalia or use chants or, any of those things that I don't know them, first of all, but, I'm not presenting that I'm representing a culture, which would be really negative appropriation. So anyway, I realize there's been a little bit of a negative podcast to start the new year. I promise I'll get more positive from here on out. But look to be a solution and not a problem. Look to support people in their spiritual quests. If people are straying, when I saw these people with Apache headdresses, I didn't call them names or whatever, but I called it out and I said, this is a hodgepodge thing. This might be offensive to some people. You should really rethink wearing these. I think you're presenting the wrong image here, and there's no reason why you can't be doing an initiation without these things, without borrowing these, the regalia from another culture. So anyway, I will wrap this up for this episode. I hope that you have a happy and healthy new year. Do your part to keep the world healthy, to help get us past this pandemic and restore some normalcy to everyone's life. I love you all. I wish you a great new year.
You have been listening to Speaking Spirit with your host, John Moore. For more info or to contact John, go to mainshaman.com. That's maineshaman.com.